Behind the Shades.
Hello, Momma FoxFire. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me.
So, my first question, even though this is not a topic we're going to talk about, is your room looks absolutely
Oh,
amazing. Is there like a story behind it, a history, or is it just you expressing yourself?
so I mean, I'm glad that you think it looks great. I've still got some stuff to unpack, like over here and everything, but that's kind of hidden behind me, so you can't necessarily see the box unless I turn. But yeah, so this is my office. I moved and just wanted to have a space. First of all, I work from home, so I needed a space for my desktop and everything, for my computer and for my work laptop and all of that. And then I also wanted to have a space that I could stream in. So I do stream and I do a podcast and everything. So it's one of those things. I just wanted it to look nice behind me and kind of reflect my personality, which is where we are. And then you can't see them, but I do have my snake tanks are in here too. So I've got 5 snake tanks and a bookshelf that you can't see over on that side.
And she has snakes to go around with that decoration.
Yeah.
What kind of snakes do you have?
I've got 2 ball pythons, one corn snake that I'm questioning whether or not he's a corn snake because he's completely white. And I think he might actually be a king snake based on how big he's getting. And then I have 2 Brazilian rainbow boas.
I remember growing up, I used to love snakes. Didn't really like seeing them in public, but
Yeah.
I remember I used to read about like the boa constrictor, the
Mhm.
anaconda, the king cobra. And one thing I really liked about the snakes was the different designs on the skin.
Yes. Yeah.
Very unique to each snake. So what got you into having 5 different snakes? That's kind of unique.
Well, so like you, when I was a kid, I accidentally this is how pets come into my life. I accidentally get them. So when I was a kid, my sister was cleaning her room one day and she thought she was picking up a ribbon along her baseboard and it actually wound up being a rat snake. And for a little while, I had a pet rat snake and my mom wouldn't let me keep it in the house. So my 8th grade science teacher, shout out to him, was like, you can totally keep it in my classroom. I'll help you get like food for it and everything. And so he let me keep my snake in his classroom. And we just kind of had him for a little while. And he did die eventually. And then whenever I was older, I had fish and cats and dogs and all of that. And my oldest was at the time like 12 or 13. And he said, Mom, I really want a snake. Well, my cousin breeds ball pythons, or he did at the time. He was breeding ball pythons. And so I reached out to him and he was like, yeah, let's do it. So I got one. And then I wound up, that one stayed in my 16-year-old's room. And I was like, you know what? I want my own snake. So I got my own snake. And then I got the theoretical corn snake from my cousin, who was a different cousin who was moving and couldn't keep reptiles in her new apartment. And then the rainbow boas are just something that they've been a dream snake ever since I wanted to keep snakes. So
I get to see my audience now like, oh my God,
well, that's
I'm
how
so
everyone,
terrified.
yeah, that's how everyone feels. These are non-venomous. They're all very chill. Like if you hold them, well, except the corn snake, who is a live wire, but he doesn't like try to bite you or anything. They're just another kind of pet. People have fish, people have turtles. We do also have a turtle, but it's just one of those things. Some people like it, some people don't. And if you don't like it, that's okay.
Absolutely. So if you guys ever doubt what she's saying, just look at that kind face. That's not a face of someone that lies, okay?
Yes.
So I know we're going to speak about a beautiful topic
Mhm.
and a beautiful journey. That's a little sad,
Yeah,
but she's so much stronger because of it, right? So before we
absolutely.
get into it, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and where everyone can find you?
Absolutely. So I am Momma FoxFire. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a single mom. I'm a mental health advocate. I'm a full-time proposal manager and a variety gamer. I have been through a lot in my life. However much we wind up covering today, I promise you there's more that I've been through. But all of that led to me raising awareness about mental health topics as an advocate And I've been living with depression and anxiety on and off since 2015. My cat needs all of the attention. I'm still working to overcome CPTSD from an emotionally abusive marriage. I lived through postpartum depression. I also very strongly believe that if the stigma around mental health were minimized or eliminated altogether, my grandfather, who went missing in 2017, would still be alive today. So I have, in my downtime, I do run a podcast called Even Tacos Fall Apart, and you can find all of the details on tacosfallapart.org. And my goal there is to just kind of build a place where people can share information and stories similar to what you do, kind of the resources and the laughs. And I put in the work to open up those conversations and provide our community with and podcast guests kind of the grace and the space to work through their own shit on their own time. So I am Momma FoxFire on all socials, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. It's Momma FoxFire.
Beautiful. The second person I've interviewed that actually has a Twitter account. So I must say kudos for that, because I don't know many.
Yeah. I've got Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, and I'm even on LinkedIn as Momma FoxFire. I try to be very consistent.
Perfect. So take us through the genesis, because you mentioned that you had depression. You mentioned that there's an abusive marriage. So let's start from the beginning and get to know you. So how did this all start when you realize, hey, something in my life is not right, and you're going through all these different situations that aren't necessarily healthy for you?
Yeah. So I grew up pretty typical childhood. I mean, I've got two sisters, and everything was pretty normal. In 2006, I was 21, and I gave birth to my oldest, and I was a single mother, and I had pretty severe birthing trauma, and it's something that I strongly blame the hospital and the doctors for. Fortunately, my second birth was, while not perfect, still was something that was better than the first time around. So, and from there, I got married in 2011 and became a stepmom and started to be in an abusive situation emotionally. In 2013, we had another baby. And that's, I would say in 2013 is really where I noticed mental health issues starting with postpartum depression, which at the time wasn't something that I thought you could talk about. I mean, 2013 doesn't sound that long ago, it was 10 years ago. But in the like ability to talk about things openly and honestly, we've come a long way, honestly, saying thanks to COVID. We've come a long way in a very short amount of time. So back then in 2013, it was still kind of a, we don't talk about this situation. So I would say really where I started noticing, of course, I think that they probably started before that, but where I started noticing it was kind of that postpartum depression piece in 2013, 2014.
I know for me, when I began to think about my mental health and my mental fitness was when I wanted to make my life better, where I knew a change was necessary.
Yeah.
And then the last couple of years, it was like, Terrain, you can't go anywhere. All you have is to think about what is going on in your life. And maybe there's some people that thought things were an issue that maybe weren't an issue years prior, but it raised awareness to everything that could have been an issue. So when you had your second child and you're like, hey, wait a minute, this marriage is not going the way I want it to go. Was it like a aha moment, or was it like a slow build to you discovering that this isn't working?
So as far as my marriage goes, like I think with the postpartum depression, I owe a huge debt of gratitude to my OBGYN, because she asked the right questions at the time and got me was like, hey, you have postpartum depression, by the way, in a routine follow-up. And we were able to just treat that with medication, and she was able to prescribe it. But kudos to her for identifying it, asking the right questions, getting me on some medication that really did help at that time. As far as my marriage goes, I would say I really started noticing that something was off probably around 2014, but I couldn't quite identify what it was. And really, I think more than saying something's wrong with my marriage. I was more thinking something's going on with my husband. And at that time, we were trying for another baby. We were having a hard time getting pregnant. And so I kind of chalked it up to, well, we're all having a hard time here. And it's kind of found out in 2015 that I was not going to be able to have more children, and had to have a hysterectomy. But around that same time, I also found out that my ex was having an affair. And at the same time that I found out about the active affair, I found out about a second affair that he had had prior. So I was actually able to talk to his affair partner. And I asked her directly, I said, hey, do you know if he's had other affairs? And she said yes. And I asked for some details to confirm. And it was true. She was not. I mean, why would she lie? Honestly, like, she was already caught. Why would she lie more? So, but that's kind of whenever I first noticed that something was wrong in the marriage. I will say at that time, I did not recognize, I was not willing to recognize, probably I was being a little stubborn, that I was in something that was emotionally abusive. That would take probably 3 more years for me to really recognize and come to terms with through a lot of therapy.
I remember the first time when I discovered that I was in a relationship that you can consider to be emotionally abusive. It kind of caught me off guard.
Yeah.
Because here I am, probably my arrogance, right? This can't happen to me. I'm too strong for this.
Mm-hmm.
And then you realize it creeps up on you like a thief in the night, right?
Yeah.
You look around, you're like, me?
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually going through this. When it was discovered that you're being emotionally treated this way, there's 2 affairs, and now you want to transition out
Mm-hmm.
of that situation. Did you find it difficult to let go physically, or is it harder to let go maybe emotionally?
It was a little bit of both. So, we went through back in 2015, we went through couples therapy together. He said the affairs were a mistake and all of this. And again, at that time, I didn't recognize what was going on around me, because very similar to you, like, I never saw myself as, oh, I'm that girl that's going to wind up in an emotionally abusive marriage. Well, I also never saw myself as that girl who would stay if someone cheats. And I did wind up staying in my head, rationalizing. I stayed for the kids. I highly discourage if you're in a relationship and you're staying for the kids, you are doing, and I did more damage to my kids than if I had left, because what you are doing is modeling to them a relationship that they are going to repeat later in life. And so if you're in something that is unhealthy and your only reason for staying is the kids, that is not good enough. But at the time, I rationalized, and we as humans are so good at rationalizing the shit out of whatever we want to have happen, right? So I still loved my husband. I thought he loved me. I loved my kids. I loved everything, So I was very good at rationalizing in my head, I'm going to stay in this situation. He's sorry about the affairs. We're going to go to therapy. We're going to go to this recovery program together. And this was when I first had my first exposure to therapy, and it was the worst experience with therapy. And I actually wound up not going to therapy for a couple of years after that. I didn't go back until 2017, because my therapist at that time, all she wanted to do was give me worksheets and say, well, you need to try harder, or those kinds of comments that were just very dismissive and not actually addressing anything as far as what I could do to help myself and help understand what I was going through and help my emotions. It was just like, do this worksheet and then we'll talk about it, I guess, next time. Kind of very, very dismissive. I think I went to her like 4 or 5 times, really only a handful of times. And then I was like, wow, therapy is really shitty. I'm not going back. Because I thought, what a therapist is a therapist is a therapist. And the reality is that that's not true.
Was there a type of help that you were wishing that you had? Maybe not from this person, but from someone else during that time?
So we also went through couples therapy, and I actually really liked couples therapy. The reason we didn't continue with couples therapy is that my ex, and he literally said this, I am not making this up. He said, we're not going to therapy anymore because I just can't win. And that was it. We stopped going. You can't force someone to go to therapy. I tried. You just can't. You can't force someone to go to therapy. You can't force them to work through whatever they don't want to work through. If they don't want to do the work, they're not going to do the work. So I really enjoyed the couples therapy. We did also do an affair recovery program. It was like emergency marital something or other, which was an online program, and it was specifically for couples who were going through betrayal and infidelity recovery. And I did enjoy that. I thought that they gave us a lot of space to connect with other couples who were going through something similar. I thought that that was really good. And we did go through that. Eventually, he decided he didn't want to do that work either, though. So
sometimes it's just difficult to be told what you're doing is wrong.
Yeah.
But it's better to hear it from someone that is neutral. Like the therapist doesn't have any incentive to make something up.
Right.
Right. Despite the bad experience that you may have or the bad experience that he may have, it's someone saying that, hey, if the approach is right, not someone that's just throwing out worksheets like they're dollars at a gentleman's club, right? But
yeah,
we want to make sure that we're helping them out. We're saying that, hey, if you guys want to fix this, work needs to be done on both sides.
Absolutely.
But one thing I want to ask you, if we flash forward, is going through what you've gone through, how would you want to help someone who doesn't want to go through that, but they're on the verge of having a difficult relationship, whether it be a boyfriend, girlfriend, or husband or wife?
So I think something that would have helped me is hearing of more people who went through something like this, because I didn't recognize what was happening. Like I had been so cut off from everyone in my life, which is part of emotional abuse. That is part of the pattern there, is that they isolate you from everyone who could provide support or who could point out, hey, this isn't right. By the time I recognized that something wasn't right, it was like it was too late. And I think if I had more exposure to, hey, abuse is not just physical, it can be emotional. Here's what that looks like. Here's what it could sound like. I think if I had been a little more armed with some information, that I maybe could have set some different boundaries. And now I say that myself personally, I am the kind of person who I feel like I went through that and I needed to go through that. Because if I hadn't stayed in that relationship, I wouldn't have my youngest, right? So of course, I feel like I could have gotten out right after I had him. If I could do it all over again, I would have gotten out right after I had him. And I think that would have solved a lot of issues, honestly. But if there is someone out there and you find yourself in a situation that isn't right, you find yourself unable to set boundaries, you find yourself unable to see the people that you would like to see in your life, or your self-confidence is being broken down by your partner, all of these things that aren't healthy, that don't necessarily get talked about a lot. I think that would have helped me recognize it sooner than I actually did. And I didn't recognize it. So I went back to therapy, not because of my relationship. I actually went back to therapy because my grandfather went missing and I was having a lot of just things. It was a very stressful time. And this was 5 years ago. There are still emotions around that, and it's like, I needed to go to therapy to work through some of this. Of course, at that time I was reconnecting with my family because this giant traumatic event brought us kind of back together. And so I was able to reconnect with some family, but also because I went back to therapy, my therapist never said, hey, you're in an abusive relationship. She did not name that for me. What she did was point me to resources. And she would say, look, here's this information about good relationships and bad relationships. I just want you to review it and we can talk about it. Look, here's this information about setting boundaries. I just want you to review it and we can talk about it. And she would give me, something to read. She would point me to a website. She would do all of these things that was just like, we're talking about all of the stuff with your grandfather. We're talking about all this stuff with your family. We're talking about all of this stuff with work. Cause at that point, she was wonderful. I love her so much. It was the best second experience with therapy I could have had. And because she never said you're in an abusive relationship, because I think sometimes someone saying you're in this can make you just like gut reaction deny it, right? No, not me. No, absolutely not. That's not me. So because she let me realize it myself, or she helped me realize it myself. And then once I was like, oh shit, hey, I think I'm in an abusive relationship. She's like, finally. and we talked through it some more. So I think just having the information hopefully would help someone else recognize that they're in something that is unhealthy. And then also, if you are already in something that is unhealthy, it'll help you figure out how to get out of it and how to get out of it safely.
So I know you shared there's some creative ways that you have been able to overcome all of this, as well as to build yourself back up, because you shared how you've had the bad experience in the marriage. You had the bad first impression with the therapist. You just wanted someone to say, hey, here are the resources. I want you to self-identify, self-analyze, and then you can say, world, I am in an abusive relationship. Mm-hmm. I think this person's a monster. I think this person's not treating me well. I deserve more. So talk to us about how you're using gaming, because I used to be the biggest gamer a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. So share to us how that is playing a very important part of your life.
Okay, so first I want to know what games you played.
Me? Okay.
Yeah, what were your favorite ones to play?
My favorite games, she's trying to call my bluff now, everyone. Was,
no, I'm not. If you don't want to share, you don't have to.
No, of course. You're sharing. I have to share now. So Final Fantasy series.
I love Final Fantasy.
Was a big one. I have to go get my collection out. RPG was big. Okay. Was really, really big. So Final Fantasy, I think at one point I owned every single one up until 13.
Oh my gosh.
I think, yeah, I was like so into it. And there's a couple more. I'm just trying to name some of the big ones from like the early 2000s, because I did go backwards. Mm-hmm. And playing, one of my friends was big into Link, like Legend of Zelda. I just couldn't get into Zelda, but Final Fantasy was my biggest one. And I still play it till this day. Yeah.
I played Final Fantasy, I think early 2000s also, actually. It was like Final Fantasy 2. I don't even know. It was one of the first ones that they had online. That was a long time ago, though. I haven't kept up with it, but that was one of my very first ones, and I really enjoyed it. So first of all, let me back up. Like, I didn't just become a gamer specifically to get over this. I kind of, like I was saying with my family, reconnected with my love of gaming. So I was a gamer in the early 2000s as a teenager. And I also, as a kid, like I played things like Mortal Kombat and, what's that other one? Oh man, there's one that you're like, it's like Mortal Kombat. Vigilante. Yes, Vigilante. That's the one. But we didn't have a gaming system in our house. I went to my cousin's house to play that. So every time we would go over there, we would play things like that. And it was a lot of fun. And then one of my very best friends in grade school, she had Nintendo or something like that. And she would always have these different games and we would play games together. And so I was a gamer as a teenager up until I got married, really. I played a lot of RuneScape. I played a lot of Age of Empires and StarCraft and like all of these different games. I really enjoyed games where there was an online component where I could connect with other people and just kind of be a little social, even in the middle of the night. because you don't want to go out in the middle of the night, but hey, there's always somebody online in a game. If you got energy and time to talk to somebody, there's always somebody online in a game. So after I got married, my ex really did not like me gaming. And I don't know if that was just because he wasn't a gamer and so he didn't understand, or if that was another of the, you are connecting with too many people, was that part of the isolation? But I really, honestly, I gave up almost every hobby that I had while I was married. And that was kind of the first one that I really gave up, was gaming, because he just was so adamant that it was stupid, that there was no point to gaming, that it was useless. It was a waste of time. Like all of these things that he would just kind of dig, until I finally was like, I guess I don't want to do this anymore. And so fast forward now to 2017, when my grandfather went missing. I'm back in therapy. I've reconnected with my sister, who is also a big gamer. She played WoW back in the day, and still plays WoW, actually. So she was still playing games and stuff. And I was connecting with her, and she was like, look, I'm in this program called Discord. We are on a call with friends every night across the United States. Like, they're friends that we've met in person. Instead of talking on the phone for hours and hours, why don't you just hop into this call with us and we can kick back and relax a little bit? And so I joined Discord, and I was just in this Discord call with all these people who I hadn't necessarily met, but my sister, my brother-in-law, a couple of other people were in there. And I kind of started gaming with them a little bit every now and then, but almost every night I was in the Discord and in there talking to them. And that kind of got me back into, I found this connection back with my sister. We were really, really close by then. And because she was such a gamer still, she had never given that up. She and her husband are both gamers. So it was just another thing for me to do with her. And then once I started gaming again, it was like, oh shit, I really missed this. And so I got back into it in 2017. And that's something that continues. My therapist was supportive. She was like, look, I feel like that is something that is a good distraction for you. Don't lose yourself in it, but it's a good distraction for you. It's something that you can use to de-stress, and just because there was so much going on at that time in my life, that I did need a distraction. I needed to be able to take myself out of things sometimes. And gaming was a way to do that. And it was the healthiest way I could do it without getting out of the house, because I wasn't really allowed to get out of the house on my own at that time.
I know a lot of women that I work with that have lost themselves when they get into relationships because they've given up so much. And it always starts off with something small. Like, many people may think, well, it's just gaming. But gaming, to a person that enjoys gaming, that's where they could feel free. They're amongst people that are like them. They feel like they belong. And it's a shame that so many people will give up their hobbies and they'll become isolated to the point where, and you've probably heard this, if I'm not with my wife, if I'm not with my husband, what am I going to do with my time?
Yeah.
They can't even fill their day. Did you reach the point where you're giving up all these things and you're like, I only have him and nothing else?
Yeah, I did get to that point, but it happened so gradually that I didn't notice until it was already to that point, and I got to that point where it was just work and then home. And even with work, even when I was at work, I had to always have my phone with me, right? I mean, I've got it on a charger right now, which is why it's right here. But I had to always have that right on me, because if I didn't respond to a text fast enough, he would start calling me and calling me and calling me. And he would start calling my work phone too. And then he would just scream into the receiver, why the fuck aren't you answering your texts? And so I would get in trouble for not answering. So even when I was at work, it still wasn't a break. And I couldn't stop anywhere between work and home because it was too big of an imposition for him to do anything at home. So I was responsible for everything at home. I was working. I was actually making more money than he was. So I was making the most money, but I wasn't able to do anything with it, So it was definitely one of those things that I didn't have, but there was no thought of what would I fill my time with. That was never something that I can recall myself thinking, like, what would I do if I didn't have him? I don't remember ever thinking that, because aside from him, I was taking care of everything at the house. I was making the most money. My day was already full of stuff. Now, after the kids went to bed, whenever I first kicked him out, after the kids went to bed, I did go overboard with gaming. Like I definitely went overboard with it. I was like, kids are in bed. I'm just going to game. I'm going to turn myself off. I'm going to stop thinking about stuff. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to throw myself into a game and be done with it. And fortunately, still seeing my therapist, she was asking me how things were going, and I explained to her kind of what was going on. And she's like, okay, I want you to do something that is not gaming at least a couple of times a week. She said it doesn't have to be something productive. It doesn't have to be cleaning. It doesn't have to be anything like that. But I want you to do something that's not gaming, whether that is painting your nails, going to a spa, going for a walk, whatever it is. And I was like going to the gym and stuff during the day, but it was after the kids went to bed, that was the problem for me. And I think a lot of that was because now I don't have someone hovering over me. Like a kid who has been with strict parents all their life, they get to college or they get to their first apartment, and it's like Party City, not the store. But they're just overboard with drinking or drugs or just in general eating a whole cake. Look, whatever. Now they're adults. I say adults because boy, do we kick kids at 18. They turn 18. It's like, you're an adult. See ya. But if you grew up with very strict parents, you just go overboard. And I think that's what I was doing, is I had been with someone who was so restrictive and over the top that I threw myself into something that I hadn't really been allowed to do, or that I was judged for doing. And so I kind of threw myself into it, but it wound up being okay because then I started streaming. And once I started streaming, I started doing mental health interviews. And once I started doing the mental health interviews, it gave me a passion project. So streaming wasn't necessarily a passion project. Gaming definitely wasn't a passion project. It's fun, but it's not, I wouldn't call it a passion project. But now with the mental health interviews that I do, it's like that gets my brain engaged. That gets a community around me to get engaged with, and all this stuff. So yeah, gaming is not the first choice probably for a lot of people. They don't think of gaming as something that you can do for self-care, but it helped. I think it really did save me. It really did.
What's some of the impact that you want to make in regards to mental health awareness for everyone?
I think for me, the mental health awareness stuff, I've got, oh, no. All right. So this is my mustache tattoo. That's for my one grandfather. I use that for men's breast cancer awareness. He died to breast cancer, and men can get it too. And then this one over here is a fire axe. And this is for my grandfather who went missing, and likely committed suicide, likely killed himself. You're not supposed to say committed suicide anymore. I still slip up and say that sometimes, but, so because I really do believe that if he hadn't had this old school mentality of, you don't talk to people, you keep things private in your family, you don't show emotional vulnerability, you don't do any of these things that we now know are good and healthy. I think if he hadn't had that mentality, if he had gotten some help, that he would still be with us today. And so my goal with everything that I do now as far as mental health advocacy is, it started with being for Papa and being for, this is something that could have helped someone. And now I also am using it kind of with my kids. So my youngest has Tourette syndrome. My oldest is transgender, and we live in Texas, which is not a politically nice state to have any sort of divergency, any sort of anything. It's not a good state to be in. And so now for my kids, you know, I've gone to bat for them at the schools. I've gone to bat for them with some friends, teammates, that kind of thing. And the way that I go about that is just, again, be overly armed with information and statistics. Like I had to go to my oldest Spanish teacher because she wasn't using the correct pronouns for my kid. And she said, well, what, Spanish only has 2 pronouns. So I'm like, yeah, and you're using the wrong one. Like, that's the problem. Just switch it. And so I went in and I said, no, it's like 72% of teens, if they don't receive gender affirming care, they are 72% more likely. And I'm not talking medication. That's a whole separate topic. I am talking just something as simple as using the correct pronouns makes someone 72% less likely to attempt suicide or to self-harm. And so with something as simple as that, like, it shut her down. Because if I have the information, if I can provide the studies, the information, the science to say you are doing harm to my child and other children like him, then it gives a teacher a chance to correct their behavior, not only for my child, but also for other kids. And by the time my youngest, so my kids are 16 and 9, and by the time my 9-year-old gets to 10th grade, which is where my 16-year-old is now, I hope that the teachers in that school are a little more inclusive, a little more understanding, you know, by then. So my mental health advocacy is to reach anyone and everyone who needs to hear that it's okay to not be okay and that you're not alone. But it's also for my kids and just trying to make our specific community a little better.
I ask myself this question probably almost every day, definitely once a week. If I had like a few wishes, if I was like Aladdin and I had the genie lamp, right? One of those wishes would be just for everyone to practice, not even practice, just for everyone to have understanding of the differences that we have. It's okay if it's not something that you subscribe to or for something that you practice in your household, but just understanding of someone's difference or someone's ability to lead a life that is different from yours. That is a wish that I would make over and over again. If you had the same opportunity, what are some of the wishes that you would just grant for all of us in the world to have?
I think that one is probably the best one, to just say, like, look, let other people live their lives however they want to live them. If they are not hurting other people, let them be. Just let them be. I think also just understanding that, especially in the workplace, you should be able to talk about mental health topics and mental health struggles openly, like you have a cold. It should be that easy. Like, oh, I'm under the weather today. Oh, what's wrong? My depression's really bad today. Oh, I'm not feeling great today. Oh, what's wrong? My anxiety is super high. I'm sorry. Is there something that we can do to support you, or do you need the day off? Like, it needs to be that simple to me. And I think in schools, the same thing. Like, they need to be a little bit more on the mental health side of things, not just the physically demanding that everyone sit still in a classroom. You know, I go through that with my 9-year-old. He literally cannot control his tics. And so because he cannot control them, he is allowed to get up and move around if he needs to. He is allowed to move his legs under the desk whenever everyone else is supposed to be still. But to me, because he has this special permission to do that, I think it's dumb that he has to get special permission. Kids are kids, let them be kids. And I think that kids' mental health would be so much better if schools would treat school like an education opportunity and not a prepare people to work opportunity. So I really think, let people be. If they're not harming anyone, if they're not harming themselves, let them be. And school needs an overhaul and work needs an overhaul. Those would be probably my top 3 wishes.